Welcome to Additional Features to Configure 6.1 Workflows. In this video, we're going to switch the Solution Designer to Classic mode. We're going to create a real-time workflow process. We're going to check for fields to contain data. We're going to combine multiple fields together in order to create a dynamic name for a record. We're going to activate and test the workflow. We'll discuss the best use cases for workflows. To start creating workflows, we're going to visit make.powerapps.com and open up one of our solutions. I have the Crew App solution open. And from the top menu, we're going to switch into Classic mode. This is currently the only way to create a workflow. You can create flows and other processes through the modern UI, but in order to create a workflow, you need to convert the solution over into a Classic mode. Once it's in Classic mode, you can then go to the processes and select New. You'll want to give it a process name. I like to try to be very descriptive. All of the workflows that I create operate in real time. If there's ever a time when I would create a workflow that operated as a background process, I use a flow instead, as that's the new modern version of a workflow. But currently there is no synchronous version of a flow. All flows run asynchronously. This can be a little bit confusing. You can think of asynchronous and synchronous processes almost like traffic control intersections. A synchronous process is like a four-way stop, where each action needs to wait for all the other actions to complete in order before it can do what it wants to do. So a car stopped going west would have to wait, regardless of what the other cars were doing, before it could continue on its path. An asynchronous process operates more like a roundabout, where cars can go and enter and do their activity if there's nothing at risk or in the way that's critical. That's more of what an asynchronous process is like. Workflows can operate in either of those two paradigms. They can either be a background process, which is asynchronous, or a real-time process, which is synchronous. Microsoft Flow offers the same functionality and even more capability than a standard workflow, but it can only operate in the asynchronous pattern at the current time of this recording. So when I make a workflow, it's usually always to fill a specific synchronous need, and those are usually very rare. The typical one that I'm going to show you today is to concatenate and create a name dynamically based on other fields that have been filled out on an entity record, in this case, the work order. So for the process name, I'm going to stick with my long standard naming convention for workflows, which is RT for real time, then the name of the entity, and then a dash, and then a description of what it does. This is my own personal pattern. You can come up with your own in your organization. It's usually good to come up with some sort of naming convention that makes sense and that's easy to read. The category I'm going to choose workflow, and then I'm going to uncheck the box run this workflow in the background. And then for the entity, I'm going to select the work order. Once this is filled out, I'm going to select OK, and this will create the workflow and open up a new window. Inside of this window, I'm going to change the scope to run at the organization level. This ensures that all users can run this workflow. This workflow is going to run when the record is created and also when certain fields change, like the account and the scheduled start date. Next, I'm going to go and configure what the workflow does. So in the Add Step menu, I'm going to choose Check Condition, and I'm going to check that there is a scheduled start date and an account. I like to give a little description of what I'm doing. In the condition, I click the hyperlink. This opens a new window. And this window will select work order and also that the account and make sure that it contains data. We also want to check that the scheduled start date on the work order also contains data. We're going to group these with an AND statement and then save and close. Once we know that that is true, then we're going to set the name. So we'll choose Update Record, set the name as our description, and then click Set Properties. This will pop open another new window. And here we're going to set the name, and we're going to click into the name field, and then from the Form Assistant, we'll set this to the work order, the account, and then a space, a dash, another space, and we're going to also add in the work order scheduled start date. and save and close. And now we can save and close, select the workflow, and choose Activate. And now we can open up the app and test our workflow. So select Play. Then from the main section, I'm going to choose Other, Work Orders, and we'll select New. Here I'm going to pick the account. We'll do Magic Coffee. And the scheduled start date, we'll choose Halloween. I'm going to save and close. And now we can see the name is set to Magic Coffee - Halloween, 10/31/2019. It's important when creating workflows to keep in mind that you should only be using a workflow for a synchronous process that must happen immediately. If your process can happen in the background or doesn't need to happen instantaneously, Microsoft Flow is a much better solution with a lot more capability that's easier to manage. So definitely use Microsoft Flow if you can before you use a workflow. Let's recap the video. You must switch the Solution Designer to Classic mode in order to add a workflow. Workflows can run asynchronously and synchronously. Clicking Run this workflow in the background determines which paradigm the workflow will operate in. Microsoft Flow is usually a better and more capable solution than a workflow. Workflows should only be used when you need to run a process synchronously.